Troublemakers Parts 1, 2, and 3. The Broken Crown. The boy sat alone in the dark cell. Nosians in power armor and armed with coil guns stood guard beyond the durasteel bars. The boy lifted his head. A long infected cut ran from the left side of his jaw across his nose and to the right side of his forehead. The chains attached to the boy's wrists rattled as he reached yet again for the key just outside of his reach. One hand had been pierced through and through. Dark, almost black blood dripped sluggishly from the wound as the boy weakly strained against his chains. He'd won the duel. He'd earned his and his village's freedom weeks ago, but the monarch had imprisoned him anyway for the murder of a superior being. The chains rattled again as the boy slumped back against the wall, his brow beaded with sweat as his fever peaked. He felt cold, so very tired. The key was just an inch away from his fingertips. Freedom was right there, but the boy no longer had the strength to even reach for it anymore. The boy shivered, vision darkening as he accepted his fate. The boy asked for forgiveness from any god that would listen as he closed his eyes and let out what he felt would be his last breath. "Would you really take my hand so easily, young man?" The boy opened his eyes, but at the same time he didn't. He looked around at the sudden monochrome of his surroundings. One of the guards froze in mid-turn. Then he looked at the tall void-black shape that stood in front of him. The boy smiled with relief as he spoke for the first time in months. "I have failed my people. It is only correct that I atone." The void-black shape remained silent for a moment before sighing and taking form. A boy no older than the one in chains softly sat on the cold stone floor, cloak parting to reveal prosthetic legs and a t-shirt with ribcage print. The Reapers shook their heads sadly. "You did not fail, my child. You were deceived and betrayed. All of you were." The boy remained silent, head bowed in resignation. Death looked on the boy with pity, studying the infected wounds and dry blood that covered him. The Reaper showed no more emotion as he looked at the chains that fettered the teenager. Death then gazed at the hourglass in his palm. The top was empty. He should be guiding the boy to the afterlife by now. But Death had been a human once as well. And as he looked at the boy across from him, his cold heart stirred. "Your body and mind may be broken, my child, but I feel your spirit still has strength. Rise from this place unbroken." The Reaper crushed the hourglass in his palm. There was a flash of light, and the shackles around the boy's wrists, ankles, and neck came loose. The Reaper stood, beginning to fade away. "What is your name, child?" The boy's soul spoke, glowing as it did. "My name is Drake." The Reaper smiled, and he was gone. The cell door rattled open, and one of the Nosian guards made a sound of disgust. "It's already half rotten. These things take forever to die." Drake remained still, eyes closed, waiting. "We still gotta haul the corpse out. Don't want the entire place smelling of rotten livestock." A gaunted metal hand grabbed the chain attached to Drake's collar and paused. "Where's the lock?" Drake took his chance as he ripped an arm free from its shackle. He grabbed the Nosian's unstrapped sidearm and pulled it from the holster like a bolt of lightning. A smile tugged on the infected cut across Drake's face as he pressed the muzzle against the Nosian's plain metal faceplate. Drake took a deep breath and grinned malignantly at the stunned lizard. The lizard sputtered in disbelief. Eurystilla Drake pressed the trigger stud, and the laser pistol flashed blindingly as a hole was burnt completely through the Nosian's head and helmet. Without missing a beat, Drake turned the blaster on the other guard. Caught by surprise, the guard barely registered Drake's manic, soulless grin as his heart was turned to steam. He slumped over, gasping and clawing at the ground until he fell still, purple blood pooling from beneath the armor. Drake slowly, painfully got to his feet and stumbled to the open cell door. He listened carefully, body begging for food and rest, but he didn't hear any more guards for the time being. He glanced back at the guard's armor, then placed his foot against the bottom of one of the dead guard's boots. "I should be able to fit." The power-armored figure clumped steadily through the halls of the arena, cutting through the milling drunk of the highborn and their personal guard. The figure seemed twitchy, a hand hovering near the last pistol on their side. The armor's articulated tail dragged limply like the operator had been born tailless, and in truth they had. A cold fire burned in Drake's chest as he marched through the crowded halls. Each step sent pain shooting through his body from various infected wounds. But Drake wasn't done yet. So long as he could draw a breath, he'd make sure the promises made to his people were kept. The Nosian power armor fit poorly, clearly designed for non-human anatomy. Drake made to take another step, but didn't fully lift his foot up before leaning forward. He came crashing down face first. The intoxicated nobles and oligarchs laughed, and the boy felt his rage flare. But he couldn't afford to be rash. They'd all get what was coming to them eventually. Drake slowly clambered to his feet, continuing to march towards the fighter pits. They hadn't blindfolded him when they brought him in. A mistake on their part. Drake's shattered thoughts continued to wander as exhaustion and pain drew him into autopilot. He remembered the little Cloville girl that lived next door. The little loaves of bread she baked. You'll come back to us, right? Drake had to stop for a moment as the memory punched him in the gut. He'd offered himself up for the pits in her father's stead. Normally, Drake would have been too young for the fighting pits, not even being 18 solar cycles old. But he was also an orphan, his parents having died trying to defend their home city. Drake felt it was his duty to volunteer for the arena. And now his duty had changed. The hallways became wider and less crowded as Drake made his way deeper into the arena's bowels until he reached a large, intricately carved wooden door flanked by 2 guards. He looked up at the design on the door and felt his blood boil. A depiction of the monarch stood triumphantly upon a mountain of human and Cloville corpses, flag planted in a skull far too small to be an adult. Drake took a labored step forward, heart beating in his ears as his thoughts turned to violence. Remember this, parasites. If you somehow defeat the warrior you're faced with, you'll have earned your and your village's freedom as decreed by our glorious monarch Dean Liars. Drake growled as he took a heavy step towards the guards, catching their attention. Deceivers, he barked, making one guard flinch and unsling their Gauss rifle. The other guard cautiously approached Drake, thinking it was one of his comrades after too much liquor. Drake locked onto the lizard who'd pulled their helmet off and began to speak. Are you all right, Private? Do you need to lay D? When the lizard was within arm's reach, Drake's hand shot out with no warning and grabbed the guard by the throat with his powered gauntlet. It was Drake's turn to speak as the lizard's purplish face began to darken as he choked and clawed at the fingers digging into his throat. I'm going to kill you all. Drake twisted his wrist and the Nosian's neck snapped, their body going limp as their eyes swiveled wildly for a moment. Drake tossed the dying Nosian to the side and sprinted at the other one who moved to block the doorway. Drake screamed, a primal, unhinged, inhuman sound as a Gauss slug pinged off his helmet. He didn't stop his charge when he felt his shoulder slam into the Nosian. He didn't stop as he felt the Nosian get pinned to the door, the wood creaking. He didn't stop even as he felt the Nosian's armor buckling under the force. He only stopped when he burst through the wooden doors. Splinters and timber mixed with purple blood and broken armor exploded into the slaves' barracks, and 100 hopeless eyes turned to the figure in blood-stained armor that now stood in the broken doorway. Drake's blood boiled as he saw the hundreds of hopeless eyes that stared at him from cages and shackled to the wall. The cages were packed haphazardly and with no sense of organization. The strong and able were caged with the sick and weak. Almost every cage had a corpse in it. Wooden signs with Nosian script nailed into their rotting flesh. The only good parasite. Drake felt something break inside of him, and he slowly reached up, removing his power armor's helmet, as his fury went from a white-hot furnace to a tiny pinprick. But that little pinprick of heat threatened to consume him as he mindlessly marched up to the closest cage and ripped the door off with his power armor's inhuman strength. He spoke in a voice no louder than a whisper, but it was a whisper that brought life to dead eyes. They're going to pay for this. They're all going to pay for this. Drake looked at the shattered door, then at the racks of medieval weaponry on the far wall. And their suffering will be tenfold what they inflicted on us. Garva sat at the head of the lush banquet table. The arena owner and minor royalty laughed jovially as his goblet was refilled. He gazed on happily as nobility and oligarchy dined their fill of the parasite's cuisine. He'd even adopted their medieval culture for his jurisdiction. The fat lizard drained his goblet and motioned for another from the parasite woman in chains beside him. He watched with sick glee as the malnourished female parasite tipped the jug with dead eyes. Guarva took pleasure in how well he treated his parasites. He gave them food, shelter, clothing, all from the goodness of his heart. Feeling especially generous, Guarva picked up a leg of poultry and threw it on the ground, watching with glee as his 2 parasite servants rapidly dove for it, fighting each other tooth and nail for the small piece of nourishment. Garva broke into applause as his wine servant clubbed the other with the mostly empty jug. leaving the other unmoving as they savagely tore into the meat. Suddenly, the massive double doors burst open. A heavily injured Nosian holding a Gauss rifle and wearing the tattered remains of a court jester outfit burst in, crying out, my lord, the parasites have escaped. They're armed and they're heading this way." The jester suddenly pitched forward with a sickening noise, a dagger buried to the hilt in the back of their skull. The entire gathering froze, looking at the dead jester in shock and disbelief, the sounds of violent fighting reaching them through the open doors. Guarva was just about to reassure everyone that everything would be fine, raising his arms to show off his grand robe. But he stopped, staring at the doorway in pale-faced shock. The human had shoulder-length black greasy hair. An infected cut across their face oozed black blood and pus in stark contrast to the manic smile filled with broken teeth. Poorly fitting Nosian power armor hung from the sallow boy's frame. A leaf-bladed bastard sword was held low in their right hand, blade dripping blood. A small one-handed axe was clutched in their left, head covered in gore much like the human. The bastard sword was raised and pointed straight at Guarva as the human spoke in a ragged voice. "I won. I earned mine and my people's freedom. Give it to me." Guarva felt his temper flare at being addressed so rudely. He swung his arm wide across his chest in a grand gesture and shouted, "You think you earned your freedom, you parasite? That whole thing was a lie to make the fights more entertaining. We never expected one of you dirty creatures to win." "Huh." Guarva sneered at the blank-faced human as the obese lizard rose to his feet and waddled around the table, continuing to speak. "Your entire species has us to thank for not wiping you out in the first place. You should be grateful, but now you're here whining about your precious freedom. Lower life forms like you don't deserve the air you breathe. Get out of my sight now, you filthy gutter rat." The fat lizard smugly watched the human drop their weapons, but the next thing he knew he was on the ground and his face hurt. Guarva looked up, dumbfounded as the human grabbed a fistful of his ornate robes and drew their fist back again. "We should be grateful." "Vam!" The human hit the fat lizard hard, making blood gush from Guarva's nose. The fat lizard whimpered as the human brought back their fist, begging, "Please, I'm sorry." "I don't hit me." Wham! The human began to shout. "What? Sorry for what? Sending thousands off to die for entertainment? Working millions to death in uranium mines? Stuffing yourself like a fat pig while we starve?" Each shouted question was punctuated with a punch so hard it broke bones and split scales. Guarva blubbered and whimpered for his life as the human threw him to the ground, eyes swollen shut. There was silence for a moment as Guarva begged blindly. The lower royalty tried to crawl away, thinking the human had left, but he didn't get far until he felt a heavy metal knee in his back and a serrated blade press into his throat scales. The human's voice was like ice as the blade was pressed into Guarva's throat. "Now be a good piggy and die squealing." Guarva felt the blade get dragged across his throat, pain blossoming and quickly fading as he began to feel lightheaded. Arduously, he rolled over, eyes unswelling just enough to see the boy's blank smile and the towering cloaked figure behind them. Drake watched the light fade from the arena master's eyes, the small nuclear sun in his chest cooling slightly as he turned slowly towards the frozen lower nobles and oligarchs. Then at their captive servants, as the humans from the pits finally began showing up. Finally, he approached a young woman whose chains were held in a death grip by an old gray-scaled Nosian. He pressed the knife into her palm, and she looked up, eyes starting to clear as he gave her a warm smile. Freedom is only a cut away. The woman took the knife as the wealthy and powerful Nosians suddenly became even more fearful. Some even quietly begged their servants to spare them. Drake just nodded to the other servants as he felt the exhaustion start to overtake him. He took a seat on the arena master's ornate chair, staring down at the Nosians, who looked all but powerless now. Drake slowly let his eyes close as the sound of rending flesh and drowned screams filled the ornate dining hall. Drake felt a great weight disappear from his shoulders, but a new one building in his chest. He'd liked making the arena master suffer, and he wasn't sure how he felt about that.